My name is Sarah Merritt. I'm 26 years old. And for as long as I can remember, my family had two daughters. One they were proud of, and one they tolerated. I was the second one. It didn't start with one big moment. No single explosion. No dramatic scene that I could point to and say that's where it began. It was smaller than that. It was 1,000 tiny moments, stretched across 20 years, each one small enough to dismiss on its own. But together they built a wall so thick around me that by the time I was a teenager, I'd stopped trying to climb it. I was 8 years old when I first heard the word slow used to describe me. Not slow like a child still learning. Slow like a verdict. Slow like a door being quietly closed. My teacher had called home. Said I was struggling to keep up. Said I needed extra support, maybe an evaluation, maybe some patience and structured help. My mother, Diane Merritt, listened carefully on the phone. Nodded. Said all the right things. Then she hung up, looked at my father across the kitchen island and said, "Well, now we know." That was it. No evaluation, no specialist, no extra support. Just now we know. Like I was a math problem that had finally been solved. Like the answer was disappointing, but at least it was an answer. My sister Emma is 2 years older than me. And Emma, from the very beginning, was everything I was not. She read early. She spoke in complete sentences before most kids her age. She memorized facts the way other children memorized songs. Teachers called her exceptional. Relatives called her a gift. By the time Emma was 12, my parents had already built her a future in their minds. Private tutors, 3 evenings a week, piano lessons, then violin, French immersion over summers. SAT prep with a Princeton graduate who charged more per hour than my father's first week's salary. I used to sit on the stairs and listen to Emma practice violin in the living room. Not because I loved music, because it was the only time my parents looked genuinely happy. I want to be clear about something. I was not a difficult child. I was not rebellious. I did not act out or cause trouble or demand attention in disruptive ways. I was quiet. I tried hard. I just processed things differently, slower to read, slower to write. My thoughts sometimes tangled in ways that made it hard to get them out in the clean, impressive way Emma always could. What nobody in my family ever cared to notice, was something else entirely. I could read people. I could walk into a room and feel the emotional temperature before a single word was spoken. I noticed the way my father's jaw tightened when he was hiding something. I noticed the way my mother smiled wider when she was uncomfortable. I noticed things other people missed because other people weren't watching as carefully as I was. When you grow up feeling invisible, you become an expert at observation. But in the Merritt household, observation wasn't a skill. It wasn't valued. It wasn't even acknowledged. What was valued was performance, grades, awards. The kind of achievement you could announce at dinner tables and watch people's faces light up. And at dinner tables, Emma lit up the room. I just tried not to disappear entirely. The dinner I want to tell you about happened on a Thursday in November. I was 16. Emma was 18. My parents had invited the extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, my grandmother Ruth on my father's side. 12 people around a table that felt designed for celebration. The food was catered. My mother had spent 3 days organizing it. I remember sitting at the far end of the table, next to my cousin Tyler, who spent most of the meal on his phone, feeling the familiar sensation of being physically present but emotionally elsewhere, like watching a film through glass. My father stood up midway through dinner. He did this sometimes. Gerald Merritt was a man who believed in announcements. He believed in moments. He'd built his small but successful construction business on the power of presence, and he brought that same boardroom energy to every family gathering. He tapped his glass. The room went quiet. "I have something I'd like to share," he said, his voice carrying that particular warmth he reserved for moments he knew would land well. "As many of you know, Emma has been working incredibly hard this past year." Smiles around the table, nods. "She has been accepted with a full scholarship to Harvard University." The room erupted. My aunt grabbed Emma's arm. My uncle stood up to clap. My mother pressed her hands to her mouth like she was watching something holy. My father beamed with the specific pride of a man who believes his child's achievement is also, somehow, his own. Emma blushed. Perfectly. Gracefully. The way she did everything. I clapped too. I want you to know that. I clapped, and the applause was genuine because Emma had worked hard, and some part of me, buried under everything else, loved my sister. But then my father's eyes drifted down the table to me. The warmth in his expression didn't disappear all at once. It faded, the way a light fades when someone slowly turns a dimmer switch. "And Sarah," he said. A pause. The kind of pause that has weight to it. "Sarah is also doing fine." A few polite smiles. An aunt nodded in that vague, non-committal way people nod when they don't know what else to do. Nobody clapped. Nobody stood. Fine. 20 years of trying, condensed into 4 letters. I stared at my plate. The food blurred. I concentrated very hard on not letting my face do anything that would embarrass anyone, mostly myself. And then, beneath the table, a hand found mine. Thin fingers, warm, papery skin. Grandma Ruth. She was sitting 2 seats down, and she had reached across without a word, without drawing attention, and taken my hand in hers. I looked up at her. Her eyes were steady, calm, and behind the calm something fierce. Something that looked like it was directed straight at my father. She didn't speak. Not then. But she squeezed my hand once, firmly, like she was trying to pass something through her palm into mine. Like she was saying, "I see you. Even if nobody else does, I see you." That was the night I stopped, hoping my parents would change. Not because of one comment, not because of one dinner, but because I finally understood that what I'd been experiencing wasn't a phase, wasn't a misunderstanding, wasn't something that would correct itself when I achieved more, or tried harder, or became easier to explain to relatives. It was a pattern. 20 years of being the child they mentioned last. The child they described in negatives, not academic, not driven, not like Emma. The child who sat at the far end of the table while the spotlight moved smoothly past her to land always on her sister. My mother said it plainly, 2 weeks after that dinner. I had come home with a report card that was genuinely better than my previous semester. I had worked for it. I was proud of it, quietly, in the private way I'd learned to be proud of things. I showed her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she set it down on the counter and said, without cruelty, almost gently, which somehow made it worse, "Some children are just not built for this kind of success, Sarah. And that's okay. Not everyone needs to be." She went back to making dinner. I picked up my report card, went upstairs, closed my door, and decided at 16 years old that if my own mother had already written the ending to my story, then I would have to write a different one myself. I didn't know then what that would look like. I didn't know about the envelope, about the stranger, about what Grandma Ruth had been quietly building for years in the background of our family, watching, waiting, preparing something that none of us could see. I just knew one thing. The version of me my parents had decided existed, the slow one, the fine one, the one mentioned last at dinner tables, that version wasn't the truth. It was their story. And stories can be rewritten. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you, most comment the word "seen" below. Let me know I'm not the only one. Because this story is just getting started. Let me tell you what Emma's life looked like. And then let me tell you what mine looked like. And you can decide for yourself whether the word fair applies. Emma's alarm went off at 6:30 every morning. By 7:15, she was at the kitchen table, eating the breakfast my mother had prepared specifically for her: eggs, whole grain toast, fresh orange juice, while reviewing flashcards for whatever exam was coming that week. My mother stood at the counter, coffee in hand, asking Emma questions from the cards. What's the capital of Uzbekistan? Who wrote the Federalist Papers? What's the formula for compound interest? Emma answered everyone, quickly, cleanly, without hesitation. My mother smiled the way she only smiled in those moments, genuinely, openly, like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. I ate cereal standing at the counter because the table felt occupied in a way that had nothing to do with physical space. By the time Emma was 15, her schedule looked like this. Monday and Wednesday evenings, private academic tutor, a retired professor who charged $200 an hour and came to the house with a leather briefcase. Tuesday afternoons, violin lessons at a conservatory 40 minutes away. My father drove her himself, every week, without fail. Thursday evenings, French immersion class with a native speaker my parents had found through a private language school. Saturday mornings, SAT prep with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour and who my father described, without irony, as an investment. Emma also had a clothing budget. Not extravagant, but real. Twice a year, she and my mother would spend a Saturday shopping new season clothes, good brands, things that fit properly and looked intentional. Emma looked intentional. Always. Like she had been assembled carefully by people who cared about the result. My schedule looked like this: school, home, homework that took me longer than it should have, done alone in my room with the door closed because asking for help at the kitchen table felt like standing in front of a panel of judges. On weekends, I helped around the house, not because anyone asked, because it felt like the safest way to justify my presence. My clothes came from two places: whatever my mother bought on clearance, and Emma's hand-me-downs. Emma was 2 inches taller than me and built differently, so her hand-me-downs never quite fit. I wore them anyway. I learned to move in clothes that weren't made for my body the same way I'd learned to move through a family that wasn't quite made for me either. When I was 16 and needed a winter coat, I mentioned it once at dinner. My mother said she'd look into it. 3 weeks later, Emma came home with a new coat, camel-colored. Wool, beautiful. I wore my old one another winter. I never mentioned the coat again. On Emma's 18th birthday, my father pulled her outside after dinner. There was a car in the driveway. A white Honda Civic, 2 years old, clean, a red bow on the hood. Emma screamed. My mother cried. My father laughed the way he laughed when he'd pulled off something he was proud of. I stood on the porch and watched. My aunt nudged me. You'll be next, I'm sure. I smiled. Sure. My 18th birthday came 8 months later. Dinner at home, a store-bought cake, a card from my parents with $50 inside, enough for 2 tanks of gas in a car I didn't have. My father gave a small toast. He said he hoped I'd figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Not "I believe in you," not "I'm proud of you," not even "Happy birthday, we love you." I hope you figure it out. I thanked him for the $50. I ate 2 slices of cake. I went upstairs and sat on my bed in the dark for a long time, doing the math on what it would cost to move out and whether I could make it work on a grocery store salary. I need to tell you something about the grocery store. I started working there at 17. 3 afternoons a week and all day Saturday. The pay was modest. The work was repetitive. My parents treated it as evidence of my limitations rather than proof of my independence. But something happened at that grocery store that nobody in my family ever knew about. I became good at people. Not in a surface-level customer service way, though I was polite. I was always polite. I mean, I became genuinely, almost unnervingly good at reading what was happening beneath the surface of an interaction. The woman who came in every Tuesday and bought wine and flowers, I noticed the flowers were always the same, always yellow, always for a grave. I noticed she never made eye contact at the register. I started saying less, just nodding, giving her a moment of quiet transaction in what was clearly a hard weekly ritual. She started requesting my lane. The manager, who seemed calm in front of staff but whose shoulders tensed every time his phone buzzed, I noticed he was managing something at home that was bleeding into work. I started timing my questions for the moments between buzzes. He told my supervisor I was the most professional teenager he'd ever managed. I didn't know what to call what I was doing. I just did it instinctively. I noticed things. I adjusted. I responded to what was actually happening rather than what people were presenting. It would be years before I understood that this was a skill, a rare one, the kind that can't be taught in an SAT prep class or measured on a report card. Every Sunday afternoon, I took the bus to Grandma Ruth's apartment. Grandma Ruth lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city. The walls were covered in photographs: her early years, her late husband, places she'd traveled, people she'd loved. The apartment smelled like Earl Grey tea and the particular warmth of a home that has been lived in genuinely. She always had something ready when I arrived. Tea, sometimes biscuits, always time. The specific, unhurried kind of time that felt increasingly rare in my life. We talked about everything. Not homework, not grades, not plans in the way my parents discussed plans as performance metrics, as evidence of trajectory. We talked about people. About situations, about what I had noticed that week, and what I thought it meant. Grandma Ruth listened the way very few people listen completely, without preparing her response while I was still speaking, and she asked questions that made me think harder. Why do you think he reacted that way? What did her expression tell you that her words didn't? If you were in her position, what would you have needed? She was teaching me something. I didn't fully understand it at the time. I just knew that Sunday afternoons at Grandma Ruth's apartment were the only hours of my week when I felt entirely like myself. It was on one of those Sundays, when I was 17, that she said the thing I've carried with me every day since. We were sitting at her kitchen table. I had just told her about a situation at school, a group project where I'd been overlooked for the presentation role, despite having contributed most of the research. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of being the person who did the work and someone else got the credit. Grandma Ruth listened to the whole thing. Then she set down her tea, looked at me with those steady, knowing eyes, and said, "Sarah, Emma reads pages. You read people. Do you understand the difference?" I said I wasn't sure. "Pages stay still," she said. "People don't. Anyone can be taught to read a page if they sit still long enough. Reading people, really reading them, seeing what they need before they know it themselves, understanding what's actually happening in a room, that's not something you can teach. That's rarer than any degree your sister will ever earn." I didn't know what to say. "Your parents are measuring you with the wrong ruler," she continued quietly. "That's not your failure. That's their limitation." A few months after that conversation, near the end of a Sunday visit, Grandma Ruth disappeared into her bedroom and came back carrying a small wooden box. Mahogany, with brass hinges and a small brass latch. Old-looking but well-kept, like something that had been handled carefully for a long time. She set it on the table between us. "I want you to keep this," she said. "What's inside?" I asked. "Things that will matter," she said. "But not yet." I looked at her. "How will I know when?" She smiled. The kind of smile that holds more information than the words around it. "You'll know," she said. "You read people, Sarah. When the time comes, you'll read the room, and you'll know." I took the box home. I put it in the back of my closet, and I tried, as she'd suggested, to be patient. I didn't know then that I would carry that box for nearly 9 years before I understood what she meant. I didn't know about the graduation party, about the stranger in the gray suit, about the envelope that would change the entire direction of my life. I just knew that my grandmother had looked at me, really looked, and seen something worth protecting. And for a 17-year-old girl who had spent her whole life being described in terms of what she lacked, that was everything. There are moments in your life that you know, even while they're happening, will stay with you forever. Not because they were beautiful, but because they broke something open. May 15th was one of those moments. Emma graduated Harvard Law on a Friday. The ceremony itself was held on campus, formal, academic, the kind of event that gets photographed for university brochures, caps and gowns, and the particular solemnity of people who have worked hard and know it. But the celebration my father had planned was something else entirely. Gerald Merritt did not do small. He had rented the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel, the kind of venue that appears in society columns, the kind with crystal chandeliers that cast light like scattered diamonds across a room, with silk tablecloths and a 12-piece orchestra, and catering that cost more per head than my monthly grocery budget. 300 guests, business partners, investors, lawyers from firms I recognized by name but had never been inside. Extended family members I had met perhaps twice at funerals. People who knew my father as Gerald Merritt, the man with the successful construction empire, the man with the Harvard Law daughter, the man who had built something worth celebrating. I had received my invitation in the mail. A cream envelope, embossed with gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the graduation of Emma Louise Merritt, Harvard Law, class of 2024. My name was not on the envelope. It was addressed to the Merritt family. I was, apparently, a footnote to my own family's invitation list. I spent 2 weeks deciding what to wear, not because I had many options, because I had almost none, and I was trying to make the best of them. My budget was $60. I found a black dress at a department store, simple, fitted, nothing remarkable. Clean lines. It looked appropriate. It looked, I thought, dignified. I spent $12 on a pair of earrings. I did my own hair. I borrowed a small black clutch from a coworker. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror the morning of the party, I looked at myself for a long time. I looked fine. And I had learned, a long time ago, that fine was the best I was going to get in my family's eyes. So I straightened my spine, picked up the clutch, and went. My mother intercepted me at the entrance. Diane Merritt was wearing a floor-length navy gown, her hair professionally styled, diamonds at her ears and throat. She looked exactly like what she was, the wife of a successful man at the peak of his social performance. She looked at me the way she sometimes did, starting at my feet, moving upward, landing on my face with an expression that wasn't quite disappointment and wasn't quite contempt, but lived somewhere in the narrow space between them. Is that what you decided to wear? It's what I have, Mom. A pause. Her lips pressed together in that thin, controlled line I had known since childhood. Try not to draw attention to yourself tonight, she said. This is Emma's evening. Whatever you're feeling, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us. She turned and walked back into the ballroom before I could respond. I stood at the entrance for a moment, breathed, went in. My table was number 31, near the back of the ballroom, partially obscured by one of the ornamental pillars that lined the room's perimeter. Far enough from the stage that the faces of the people speaking would be small, their expressions difficult to read. My table mates were distant relatives, a cousin I had met at a funeral 6 years ago, her husband, whose name I never caught, an elderly great-uncle who fell asleep before the first course arrived. Nobody at table 31 was going to be mentioned in any toast. Nobody at table 31 was going to be photographed. I sat down, placed my clutch on the table, accepted a glass of water from a passing server, and looked out across 300 people who were celebrating my family, the family that had seated me behind a pillar. The orchestra played Gershwin in the corner. The room filled with the particular noise of expensive gatherings, laughter pitched slightly higher than natural, conversations conducted at the volume of people performing confidence, the clink of crystal against crystal. I watched. Old habit, old skill. And that's when I saw him. A silver-haired man in a gray suit, standing near the far entrance, not mingling, not eating, not performing the social rituals that everyone else in the room was engaged in. Just watching. Still in the way that very few people at a party of 300 can manage to be still. His eyes moved across the room with a quiet deliberateness, scanning, reading, settling, and then they settled on me. Across 200 feet of gilded ballroom, through the noise and the light and the movement of 300 people, a stranger in a gray suit found me at table 31 and held my gaze for a moment longer than accident. Something cold moved down the back of my neck. I looked away. At 8:30, the orchestra stopped. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. My father walked to the microphone with the ease of a man who has never once doubted his right to own a room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for joining us this evening." The applause started before he finished the sentence. Gerald Merritt smiled, adjusted the microphone. Let the applause settle with the patience of someone who has learned to enjoy it. Tonight we celebrate an extraordinary young woman. More applause. Emma graduated in the top 3% of her Harvard Law class. She completed a prestigious clerkship. She has already secured a position at one of the most respected firms in the country. Emma joined him on stage. She was wearing an emerald green gown that I recognized as designer, the kind that costs more than my monthly rent. She looked radiant. She looked like the ending of a story that had been written for her since birth. My father's voice swelled. But tonight I am not just celebrating her achievements. Tonight I am announcing her future. The room leaned in. Emma Louise Merritt will inherit our family estate, the Merritt residence, currently valued at $13 million. Gasps. Then applause. A Tesla Model S, because she's earned it. Laughter. More applause. And most importantly, my father paused for effect. The way he always paused when he knew what was coming would land, the position of CEO of Merritt Holdings, when I choose to retire. The room erupted. Standing ovation, camera flashes, 300 people on their feet for a woman who was already crying with what looked like perfect practiced grace. My father beamed. Emma is everything this family stands for, he said. Everything we have worked for. Everything we have hoped for. He looked out across the room. I watched his gaze travel the ballroom, moving from face to smiling face. It did not stop at table 31. It did not find me behind the pillar. I did not exist in that sentence. Everything this family stands for. The cousin beside me leaned over with an awkward smile. So, what does this mean for you? I opened my mouth, closed it. What was there to say? That I had just been formally erased in front of 300 witnesses. That the termination email I had received 2 weeks ago, the one telling me my administrative position at the family company was being eliminated, now made complete, devastating sense. That this wasn't a surprise, not really, because I had spent 20 years watching this moment approach from a long way off. I'm still figuring that out, I said. The cousin nodded and turned back to the stage. The applause began to die down. Emma hugged our father. My mother joined them on stage. Photographs were taken, the three of them, golden and complete. The portrait of a family that had achieved exactly what it set out to achieve. I picked up my water glass, and that's when I felt it. Someone approaching table 31. Slowly, deliberately. Not the casual drift of a party guest looking for their seat, the purposeful movement of someone who knew exactly where they were going. I looked up. The silver-haired man in the gray suit. Up close, he was older than I'd estimated, early 60s, with deep-set eyes and the careful, measured posture of someone who spent their life in rooms where words had consequences. He was not a party guest. He had no champagne, no plate, no name tag. He stopped at my chair. Miss Merritt? Yes. Sarah Merritt? Something in the way he said my full name made me sit straighter. That's me. He reached inside his jacket and produced an envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, sealed with dark red wax bearing what looked like a notary stamp. He placed it on the table in front of me, and then he leaned down just slightly and spoke in a voice low enough that only I could hear it. Now's the time to show them who you really are. He straightened, stepped back. I'll be nearby when you're ready to talk. And then he turned and walked calmly back through the crowd, disappearing into 300 people who had no idea that the entire evening had just shifted on its axis. I looked down at the envelope. My name was written on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. Grandma Ruth's handwriting. Don't go anywhere. What's inside that envelope changes everything for Sarah, for Emma, for Gerald Merritt, and for every person who ever decided someone else's worth before they had the full story. I could not breathe inside that ballroom. 300 people, 12-piece orchestra, crystal chandeliers throwing light across silk tablecloths, and all of it had collapsed into a single point. A cream envelope on a table near the back. My name in my grandmother's handwriting. I picked it up, held it for a moment, felt the weight of it heavier than paper should be, heavier than an envelope had any right to feel. Then I stood up, quietly, the way I had learned to do everything in my family without drawing attention, without asking permission, without waiting to be noticed, and I walked toward the service exit. The hallway behind the ballroom was everything the ballroom was not. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, the smell of industrial cleaning product and catered food. The muffled sound of 300 people celebrating, reduced to a distant hum behind a heavy door. A server pushed past me with an empty tray, didn't look up. I found a section of wall between two supply closets and pressed my back against it. Looked at the envelope. Grandma Ruth had been gone for 3 years. 3 years of Sunday afternoons that no longer happened, of a chair at a kitchen table that belonged to someone else now, of Earl Grey tea I sometimes made for myself on Sunday mornings just to feel something familiar. 3 years of carrying a wooden box in the back of my closet without opening it, because she had told me I would know when, and the when had never arrived. Until tonight. My fingers found the wax seal. I broke it. Inside 3 pages. Dense, formal text. The kind of language that doesn't waste words because every word costs something. At the top of the first page, Last Will and Testament of Ruth Eleanor Merritt, executed this day, September 4th, 2021, in the presence of 2 independent witnesses and a licensed notary. I read slowly, carefully. The way Grandma Ruth had taught me to read things that mattered, not rushing toward the end, but following each sentence the way you follow a path, making sure of your footing before the next step. The first page dealt with personal belongings, the apartment, furniture, the photographs on the walls. The second page dealt with financial accounts, modest savings, a small investment portfolio, and then the third page. My eyes caught on a paragraph near the center, and everything stopped. To my granddaughter, Sarah Ann Merritt, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Merritt Holdings LLC, currently valued at approximately $13 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I read it again. Then again. 51%, controlling interest, $13 million. The hallway fluorescence buzzed overhead. Somewhere behind the door, the orchestra had started playing again. Someone laughed bright, champagne bright, the laugh of a person having the best evening of their year. I kept reading. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Sarah. She has been excluded from opportunity, diminished in family settings, and denied the support that was her birthright not due to any lack of ability, but due to a failure of vision on the part of those who should have known better. My throat tightened. Sarah is not slow. Sarah was never slow. Sarah was paying attention when everyone else was performing. That is not a deficit. That is exactly the quality this company has always needed at its center. I pressed my hand flat against the wall behind me. Kept reading. One condition applies to this bequest. To activate full transfer of shares and voting rights, Sarah must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this bequest null and void, and all assets shall transfer per the terms of my 2018 testament. 72 hours. I calculated quickly. The stranger had handed me the envelope at approximately 8:45 p.m. The deadline would fall at 8:45 p.m., 3 days from now. You read it. The voice came from the end of the hallway. The silver-haired man in the gray suit was standing 20 feet away, hands folded, watching me with the patient expression of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I straightened. "Who are you?" He walked toward me slowly and stopped at a respectful distance. "My name is Thomas Reed. I'm a partner at Reed & Associates. I served as your grandmother's personal attorney for 15 years. He produced a business card from his breast pocket, cream-colored, embossed. I took it without looking at it. "She left me specific instructions," he continued. "I was to locate you at this event and deliver that document at the moment your father made his public announcement. She planned this. It wasn't a question. For approximately 2 years, yes." Thomas Reed's voice was careful, measured. "She anticipated that your father would use an occasion like this to formalize your sister's inheritance. She wanted you to have what was yours at the same moment, not after, not eventually, at the same moment." I looked down at the will in my hands. "She told me to tell you something," he said. Directly. Her words, not mine. I looked up. She said, "Deliver this to Sarah on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready." The hallway was very quiet. "The 72-hour window?" I said. "Why that condition?" For the first time, something almost warm moved through his expression. "Because she knew you," he said simply. "She knew that without a deadline, you might convince yourself not to act, that you might wait for a better moment, or a sign, or permission that was never going to come." He paused. "The deadline isn't a restriction, Miss Merritt. It's permission." He handed me a second card, this one with a handwritten number on the back. "Call me when you're ready. I'll help you draft the board meeting request. But that decision is yours entirely." Then he turned and walked back down the hallway, and I was alone again with 3 pages of dense legal text and the sound of a party continuing behind a door that suddenly felt very far away. I did not go back into the ballroom. I took a car home, sat in the back seat and watched the city move past the window and did not think about anything deliberately, carefully, the way you hold very still when you're carrying something fragile. My apartment was quiet when I got home. My roommate was out. I sat on my bed in the dark for a long time. Then I reached into the back of my closet, and I took out the wooden box. The brass hinges creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside 3 things. A handwritten letter on pale blue personal stationery, the kind Grandma Ruth had kept in the drawer of her writing desk for as long as I could remember. A document with a date stamp from decades ago, faded, formal, the founding paperwork of something that had been built from nothing by someone who believed it was possible. And a USB drive, small, modern, clearly added recently, long after the box had been made. I reached for the letter first. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then Thomas has done his job, and tonight has gone exactly as I feared it would. I am sorry I could not protect you while I was alive. I tried, in the ways that were available to me, but there are things a grandmother cannot say directly without creating damage she cannot control. So I said them the only way I could, through documents, through preparation, through the slow and patient work of making sure that when the moment came, you would have everything you needed. The founding document in this box is the original partnership agreement from when I built Merritt Holdings with 2 colleagues in 1971. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without full board approval. The USB drive contains something else. In 2019, your father proposed a board resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 8%. His stated reason was that I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason was that I had begun to push back on decisions he was making that I believed were wrong about the company and about you. The board rejected his proposal. I was one of the votes that defeated it. I recorded that meeting, Sarah, as was my right as majority shareholder. What you will hear on that recording is your father, in his own voice, explaining to a room full of people why the woman who built everything he inherited was no longer fit to have a say in it. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave him for using you, for diminishing you, for calling you slow, for making your limitations the justification for his ambition, as though proving you were less somehow proved he was more. Use what I have given you wisely, not for revenge, for justice. There is a difference. You have always known the difference. You were never the dumb one, my darling. You were the only one paying attention. All my love, always Grandma Ruth. I set the letter down on my bed, and I cried. Not the held-back, careful crying I had done for most of my life, the kind practiced in bedrooms with closed doors, silent and contained, so that nobody would hear and nobody would ask. This was different. This was the crying that happens when something that has been pressing against you for a very long time is finally, irrevocably lifted. Not sadness, not grief. Recognition. Someone had seen me clearly, completely, across 20 years of Sunday afternoons and borrowed time and quiet conversations over Earl Grey tea. Had seen me and had believed in what she saw enough to spend the last years of her life making sure I would be protected. I cried until I had nothing left. Then I picked up Thomas Reed's card, looked at the handwritten number on the back, and I made a decision. Tomorrow I would call him. Tomorrow I would begin. Tonight I let myself feel, for the first time in as long as I could remember, exactly what it felt like to be seen. I called Thomas Reed at 8:47 the next morning. He answered on the second ring. Miss Merritt. I want to request the board meeting, I said. No preamble, no hesitation. I had spent most of the night deciding, and by the time the sun came through my window, I was done deciding and ready to move. A brief pause. Then, good. I was hoping you'd call early. Thomas walked me through the process over the next 40 minutes. An emergency board meeting request required 3 sitting board members to co-sign the petition. Thomas himself could not sign. His role was legal counsel, not governance, but he had names. Your grandmother was on this board for 30 years, he said. She was not universally loved, but she was universally respected. And your father, a careful pause, has made certain management decisions in recent years that have not sat well with everyone in that room. Who do I need? Margaret Holloway. She's been on the board since 2009. Quiet, precise, not given to drama. Your grandmother trusted her completely. I wrote the name down. And David Park. He joined the board in 2015. Your father approved his appointment, which means your father assumed his loyalty. He was wrong. Has anyone spoken to them? Your grandmother did, Thomas said. In 2021, before she passed, she told them this day might come. She asked them to be ready. I set down my pen. 3 years. She had been preparing this for 3 years. They've been waiting, I said. They've been waiting, he confirmed. Margaret Holloway answered on the third ring. Her voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a woman who had spent decades in rooms where panic was a liability. Sarah Merritt, she said, before I had finished introducing myself. Ruth talked about you constantly. I wondered how long it would take you to call. I only received the will last night. I know. Thomas let me know. A pause. Are you ready to do this? I thought about the hallway behind the ballroom, the fluorescent lights, the envelope in my hands, my grandmother's handwriting on the outside. Yes, I said. Then I'm with you. No drama, no extended deliberation. Just yes. I'll contact David Park. Between the 3 of us, the petition is valid. I can have it filed with the board secretary by end of day. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. Don't thank me yet. Her voice softened just slightly. Thank me when you're sitting at that table. Your grandmother built something worth protecting. It's past time someone in your family understood that. The petition was filed at 4:15 p.m. By 4:52, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Dad. I let it ring twice. Breathed. Answered. What did you do? Not a question. A statement delivered in the voice my father used when he was controlling anger, rather than feeling it measured. Quiet, the verbal equivalent of a closed fist. I filed a request for an emergency board meeting, I said. It's within my rights as a shareholder. You are not a shareholder. I am, actually, as of last night. Silence. Then, whatever your grandmother put in that document, it won't hold. She was unwell. She was being influenced. We will contest every word of it. You're welcome to try, I said. Thomas Reed has the original in escrow at a private bank. It's notarized, witnessed, and entirely consistent with New York state law. But you're welcome to try. Another silence. Longer this time. Sarah. His voice shifted. Dropped the control, picked up something else, something I recognized from childhood as the tone he used when he wanted something. I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but whatever it is, whatever resentment you're carrying, this is not the way. You will embarrass this family. You will embarrass yourself. You announced in front of 300 people that Emma is everything this family stands for. I said, you didn't mention me once. Not once, Dad. At your own daughter's graduation party. Silence. I'm not doing this out of resentment, I continued. I'm doing this because Grandma Ruth asked me to, and because she was right. I ended the call. My hands were steady. I noticed that. I had expected them to shake. They didn't. Emma called 40 minutes later. I can't believe you're doing this. Her voice was tight, the controlled fury of someone who had never had to fight for anything and was therefore unprepared for the experience of someone fighting back. Emma, do you have any idea what this does to Dad? To Mom? After everything they've done for this family? After everything they've built? After everything they've built for you, I said quietly. A sharp intake of breath. That's not fair. I know, I said. A lot of things haven't been fair. That's actually the point. You're doing this out of jealousy. You've always been jealous of me, and you're using Grandma's. Emma, I kept my voice even. I'm not going to argue with you about this. The board meeting is tomorrow. Whatever happens, happens in that room. You'll humiliate yourself, she said. You work in admin. You barely. I'll see you tomorrow, I said. And I ended that call too. I spent the rest of the evening preparing. 3 printed copies of the will, one for the board chairman, one for legal counsel, one for my own reference. I used the printer at a copy shop 2 blocks from my apartment, paying with cash, feeling slightly ridiculous about the caution, and then deciding caution was appropriate. I downloaded the audio file from the USB drive onto my phone and saved a backup copy to a secure cloud account Thomas had recommended. I wrote a brief statement, not an accusation, not a speech, just a clean presentation of facts in the order they would need to be understood. I read it aloud in my apartment 3 times, adjusting the places where my voice caught on something. I laid out my clothes for the morning. A gray blazer I had borrowed from my colleague Priya. It was slightly too large in the shoulders, but it was professional, and it was the best I had. A white blouse, dark trousers, my cleanest shoes. I set 2 alarms. Then I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Not from fear. Exactly. From the particular alertness that comes when you understand that tomorrow is not an ordinary day. That whatever version of yourself you bring into that room will matter. That the woman who had spent 26 years being described as fine and slow, and not quite, was about to walk into a room full of people who had never considered her at all. I thought about what Grandma Ruth had written. You were the only one paying attention. I closed my eyes. Then pay attention tomorrow, I told myself. One more time. Pay attention. I arrived at Merritt Tower at 9:40 the next morning, 20 minutes early. Another habit from a lifetime of trying harder than everyone expected. The building was glass and steel, 40 floors of it, the kind of corporate architecture designed to communicate permanence. The Merritt name was etched into the stone above the entrance in letters 2 feet high. My grandmother had chosen that font. I walked through the doors. The elevator opened onto the executive floor marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of space that announces itself as important before a single word is spoken. A security guard at the boardroom entrance held up his hand as I approached. Name? Sarah Merritt. He checked his tablet, a small frown. I don't see you on the authorized attendee list, ma'am. I'm an employee of Merritt Holdings and I have business with the board. This is a restricted meeting. I can't. Is there a problem? Emma's voice behind me. I turned. She was immaculate. Navy power suit, silk blouse, the kind of put together that takes either money or practice or both. She looked like she belonged on this floor in a way that was entirely intentional. Her eyes moved to me, to the borrowed blazer, to the leather portfolio I had found at a second-hand store for $14. Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe. Or the specific discomfort of someone who had not expected to have to look at you directly. Sarah. Her voice was careful now, calibrated. What are you doing here? I have information to present to the board. Information. She almost laughed. About what? That's between me and the board. You work in the copy room, she said. Flatly, without apology. You don't belong in this meeting. I held her gaze. Did not look away. Did not apologize. Did not fill the silence with the automatic self-minimizing I had spent 26 years rehearsing. And then, from inside the boardroom, a door opened. A woman stepped into the hallway. 70 years old, silver-haired, the unhurried posture of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. Margaret Holloway. She looked at the security guard, at Emma, at me. I invited her, she said simply. She has standing to address this board. She held the door open. Let her in. Emma's jaw tightened. The security guard stepped aside. I walked through the door. The boardroom table was polished walnut, 12 leather chairs, portraits of past executives on the walls, and there, above the fireplace at the far end of the room, a portrait of my grandmother, Ruth Eleanor Merritt. Her painted eyes looked out across the room with the same steady, knowing expression I had known across a kitchen table on 100 Sunday afternoons. I took my seat at the far end of the table, opened my portfolio, placed my hand flat on top of the documents inside 3 copies of the will, the statement I had prepared, the phone with the audio file loaded and ready. My father entered last. He looked at the room, at Margaret Holloway, at David Park, at Thomas Reed sitting quietly in the corner, and then he looked at me. His face did not go pale all at once. It went pale the way color drains from something slowly, like watching a tide go out. He sat down. Said nothing. The board chairman cleared his throat. This emergency session is now called to order. The board chairman's name was Robert Calloway. 64 years old, gray at the temples. The kind of man who had spent 4 decades in rooms like this one and had learned to read them the way sailors read weather, quietly, accurately, without announcing what he saw. He had known my grandmother for 20 years. He opened a folder in front of him, looked around the table once, and said, "This emergency session was requested by Margaret Holloway, David Park, and a third board member, citing matters pertaining to company ownership and governance. Margaret, you have the floor." Margaret Holloway rose. "Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief." She looked at me. "The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently come to light. A document that materially affects the ownership structure of this company." She gestured toward me. I yield my time to Sarah Merritt. 12 faces turned in my direction. My father leaned back in his chair with the deliberate ease of a man performing boredom. Emma sat to his right, not an official board member, but positioned as his apparent present the way props are present in a performance. I stood. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway." I opened my portfolio. "What I'm about to present may come as a surprise to some of you. I ask only that you allow the evidence to speak before drawing any conclusions." My father's hand went up before I had finished the sentence. "Robert." Gerald Merritt's voice carried the particular warmth he reserved for rooms he believed he owned. "Before we allow this to continue, I think the board deserves some context." Robert Calloway looked at him. "You'll have an opportunity to respond, Gerald. Let your daughter speak." A muscle moved in my father's jaw. He stood anyway. "I appreciate that, Robert. I do. But what we're witnessing here," he gestured toward me with the patient tolerance of a man explaining something obvious, "is a young woman in a difficult emotional state, making a very public mistake." He paused. "Let that land. Sarah is my daughter. I love her. But she works in an administrative capacity here. Photocopying, scheduling, tasks suited to her current abilities. She has no financial background, no legal training, no strategic experience of any kind." He softened his voice, the move of someone who had learned that sympathy is more persuasive than authority. She has also struggled, significantly, with certain learning challenges her entire life. We have done everything we could as a family to support her. But some limitations. Gerald. Robert Calloway's voice. Quiet. Final. Sit down. My father looked at him for a long moment. Sat down. Emma spoke before I could continue. I just want to add, her voice was measured, pitched at the frequency of reasonable concern, that Sarah has been under a great deal of stress recently. Her position here was being restructured. That kind of uncertainty can affect judgment. We tried to help her find something more suited to her abilities, I said. Emma stopped. I looked at her directly. That's the phrase, isn't it? I've been hearing it my whole life. I kept my voice level. Clinical. I appreciate the concern, but I didn't come here to discuss my abilities. I came here to present this. I reached into my portfolio and placed the document on the table, slid it to Robert Calloway. This is the last will and testament of Ruth Eleanor Merritt, founder of this company, majority shareholder for 30 years, and my grandmother. It was notarized on September 4th, 2021. It supersedes all previous testamentary documents under New York state law. The room went still. Not the polite stillness of people waiting for a meeting to continue. The sharp, absolute stillness of people who have just understood that the ground has shifted. Robert Calloway studied the first page. His eyebrows rose. He turned to Thomas Reed, who had risen quietly from his corner seat. I'm Thomas Reed, partner at Reed & Associates. I served as Ruth Merritt's personal attorney for 15 years. I can confirm this document was executed in my presence on September 4th, 2021, witnessed by 2 independent notaries. The original is held in escrow at a private banking institution. What you are holding is a certified copy. That's a forgery, Emma's voice. But the certainty had drained out of it, leaving something thinner underneath. I'd strongly advise against making that claim without evidence, Thomas said without looking at her. Reed & Associates has been in practice for 31 years. Our reputation is not something we'd risk on a document we hadn't verified completely. Robert Calloway looked up from the will. This document bequeaths 51% of Ruth Merritt's shares in Merritt Holdings to. He looked at me. To you. Yes. Controlling interest. Yes. Murmurs around the table. Board members leaning toward each other, exchanging glances not conspiratorially, but with the particular alertness of people recalibrating their understanding of a situation in real time. This is absurd, my father said. His voice had lost the warmth. My mother was ill. She was isolated. Whatever that lawyer told her, she wasn't isolated, I said. She was watching. I picked up my phone. In March of 2019, my father proposed a board resolution to reduce Ruth Merritt's voting rights from 51% to 8%. The murmurs stopped. His stated rationale was that the founder was, in his words, too old to understand modern business. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the boardroom. Calm. Measured. The voice of a man making a reasonable argument in front of people he expected to agree with him. Ruth is 80 years old. She doesn't have the context for the decisions we need to make in today's market. I'm not suggesting we remove her. I'm suggesting we adjust her role to reflect her actual capacity. 8% voting rights is still meaningful. It's still respectful. It's just honest. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Gerald Merritt was not pale anymore. He was a particular shade of gray, the color of a man watching something he believed was private become permanently, irrevocably public. That recording, he started, was made by Ruth Merritt, I said, as was her right as majority shareholder. It has been in her possession since the meeting. She left it to me, along with the founding documents of this company and a letter explaining why. I looked at my father. She recorded it because she wanted there to be no ambiguity. She wanted it documented that when she updated her will 5 months after this meeting, she was not a woman in cognitive decline being manipulated by her lawyer. She was a woman who had just watched her son try to strip her of the company she built from nothing, and who responded by making sure her wishes were legally unassailable. And I placed the founding documents on the table. The original partnership agreement from 1971 establishes that founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without unanimous board approval. That resolution would have required my grandmother's own vote to pass. It failed. 2 votes against hers and Margaret Holloway's. Margaret Holloway nodded once. Confirmed. Robert Calloway removed his glasses, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. Then he looked at Thomas Reed. In your legal assessment, this will is binding. Completely, Thomas said. The 2021 document supersedes all prior testamentary instruments. As of the moment Miss Merritt received it, she became majority shareholder of Merritt Holdings. Robert looked around the table. Does anyone have documentation that contradicts what has been presented? Silence. He looked at my father. Gerald Merritt's mouth opened, closed. He looked at the portrait above the fireplace. His mother's painted eyes looking back at him across the room she had built. He said nothing. Then we'll move to Miss Merritt's motion, Robert said. You have the floor. I stood. The power to end my father's career was in my hands. I thought about what Grandma Ruth had written. Use this wisely, not for revenge, for justice. There is a difference. You have always known the difference. She was right. I had always known. I am not moving to terminate Gerald Merritt as CEO, I said. The surprise in the room was audible, a collective shift, heads lifting, the sound of an expectation being overturned. Emma's head snapped up. Even Margaret Holloway looked briefly startled. What I am proposing, I continued, is a vote of confidence. The board will determine whether Gerald Merritt retains their confidence as CEO of this company. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns per the terms of our bylaws. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership. I looked at my father. If he has earned this board's trust, he has nothing to fear from a vote. My father stared at me, not with the dismissal I had known my entire life, not with the particular blindness of a man who has decided in advance what you are and sees only that decision when he looks at you. Something else. The specific expression of a person encountering, for the first time, the full dimensions of someone they have spent years refusing to see. Is there a second? Robert Calloway asked. Seconded, Margaret Holloway said immediately. Then we vote. All those expressing confidence in Gerald Merritt as CEO, raise your hands. 4 hands. His allies. People who owed their positions to his recommendations, whose loyalty had been purchased in the slow currency of professional favor. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Steady. Certain. The hands of people who had been waiting for permission to tell the truth. Robert Calloway counted once. Then again. The motion carries, 7-4. Per Section 14.3 of our bylaws, Gerald Merritt has 30 days to tender his resignation. My father stood. He buttoned his jacket, the slow, deliberate gesture of a man using the time to find something to hold on to. Then he looked at me. Really looked. And I understood, in that moment, that he was seeing me perhaps for the first time, not as the child he had decided I was, but as the person I had actually become. It was not a comfortable thing to witness. He walked out without a word. The door closed behind him. And the boardroom, my grandmother's boardroom, was quiet. If this gave you chills, hit like. We're almost at the end, and the ending is worth staying for. My father's resignation letter arrived on a Tuesday, 30 days after the board meeting, almost to the hour. A single page, formal, stripped of everything personal. Effective, immediately. Thanks for the years. Wishes for the company's future. Robert Calloway forwarded it to me with a 2-line email. It's done. The board would like to meet at your earliest convenience to discuss next steps. I read it twice, set my phone face down on the kitchen counter, made tea. 3 weeks later, I signed a contract. Director of Strategy, Merritt Holdings. $180,000 base salary plus dividends from my shares. The first time in my life, I would be paid in a way that reflected what I actually contributed rather than what my family had decided I was worth. Robert Calloway slid the contract across the table. Your grandmother proposed this title, he said. She included it in a sealed letter she left with Thomas Reed. She said, and I'm quoting directly, Sarah sees systems. Give her a title that lets her use it. I looked at the contract for a long moment. Then I signed it. In November, I moved into my own apartment. 1 bedroom, a building with pre-war bones and large windows that looked out over the east side of the city, the part of the city where my grandmother had started everything in 1971, with 1 office, 1 desk, and a belief that what she was building was worth the effort. I could see the street she had walked down to her first meeting from my window. I stood there on my first morning, coffee in hand, and looked at it for a long time. You built all of this, I thought. From that street, from nothing. And then you made sure I could see it. My mother called on a Sunday morning in October. I almost didn't answer. Old reflex. The self-protective instinct of someone who has learned to brace before a conversation with a particular number on the screen. But I answered. Sarah, she caught herself. Sarah, can we talk? We met at a coffee shop in the middle of the city, neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived, hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. I want to apologize, she said, before I had fully sat down. For everything. For the way we spoke to you. For the things we said and the things we never said. I waited. I told myself we were protecting you, she continued. Her voice was careful, like someone walking on ground they weren't sure would hold. That we were managing your expectations, saving you from disappointment. She looked at the table. But that was a lie I told myself so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. The truth is, I was so focused on what Emma was achieving that I stopped seeing you entirely. You let him call me slow, I said quietly. In front of family, in front of people who worked for him. You never said a word. I know. Her eyes filled. I know, and I can't undo it. But Sarah, I don't want to lose you entirely. I know I don't deserve to ask. I'm asking anyway. I looked at this woman who had braided my hair at 7 and forgotten my birthday at 22. I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen, I said. But I'm willing to try building something honest. Something real. If you are. She nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door, opened carefully, by two people who had never quite managed it before. Emma called in August, 4 months after the board meeting. I had not reached out. Neither had she until now. I've been in therapy, she said, since May, 3 times a week. That's good. It's brutal. A short, humorless laugh. Turns out being the golden child isn't actually a gift. It's a different kind of pressure. Every achievement was just the baseline for the next expectation. Nothing was ever enough. I said nothing. Let her talk. The way they treated you, she stopped, started again. I told myself it was just how things were, that you were different, that staying quiet was protecting everyone. Her voice dropped. I was protecting myself. If I defended you, I became a target. I knew that, and I chose not to risk it. I know, I said. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed. It's not. Silence between us. The specific silence of two people who grew up in the same house and are only now meeting each other honestly. I don't want to be enemies, Emma said finally. I don't expect you to forgive me. I see you now. I actually see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. We can't go back, I said. But I'm not interested in staying strangers either. A long pause. Coffee sometime? She asked. Sometime, I said. It wasn't the sisterhood I had wanted as a child, but it was honest. And honest was more than we had ever managed before. On the wall of my apartment, I hung my grandmother's portrait. The same one that had watched over the boardroom for decades, her eyes steady, her expression holding that particular quality I had tried my whole life to describe and never quite managed. She looked like someone who knew something, who had always known. Some evenings when the light came through the window at a certain angle, I looked at her and felt the same thing I had felt in her kitchen on Sunday afternoons. Seen. Completely, quietly, unconditionally seen. I understand something now that I couldn't have understood before. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was smarter than my father or more deserving than Emma. She left it to me because she knew what power does to people who want it too much. My father wanted the company because it was proof of worth, of status, of the story he told about himself. I never wanted it. I just wanted to be seen. And maybe that's exactly why she chose me. The things that made me look slow in my family's eyes, the way I processed differently, observed quietly, moved carefully through rooms where I had never felt entirely welcome, those were never weaknesses. They were the whole point. Grandma Ruth saw that when I was 7 years old. She spent the rest of her life making sure I would eventually see it too. If you've ever been the overlooked one, the one they mentioned last, the one described in terms of what they lacked, the one who sat at the back of the room while the spotlight moved past them, I want you to know something. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value. You just need to stop waiting for the people who couldn't see you to finally look. That permission was always yours. Subscribe, hit the bell, and leave me a comment telling me your story. Because you were never invisible. They just weren't paying attention.